says a deity. The dagger hides within the sash, each serpentine curve of the blade. Jewels adorn it, words march down the wavy blade. Keep the promise.
In Imperial Rome, the colour purple had a special significance in clothing. It was restricted by law to the social elite, and it indicated particular ranks. Only senators could wear tunics decorated with broad vertical bands of purple wool, while members of the equestrian class were allowed to wear narrow purple bands. The exclusivity of the colour, also known as Tyrian purple, was connected with the highly expensive production process of this imperial dye. The colour was obtained from the secretion of a species of sea snails, Murex brandaris, that lives in the eastern Mediterranean Sea. Several thousands of sea snails were required to create just 1 gram of pure dye. Daniel Solomon, deep purple, dyeing Egyptian textiles.
Rialto weighed the dagger in his hand. He could feel the weight of deity in every measure. Some lands were rich in their gems, but not Estolia. That garrison should discover amethysts and emeralds while working to create the second seclusion chamber, felt as if deity was providing the embellishment necessary to give weight to the purpose and office of last resort. After a few moments of thought, he unpinned the sash of last resort. Just that morning, he noticed the sash would need to be replaced before he passed the role of last resort on to his nephew. He would have to ask the artisans to create a new design to accommodate Garrison's vision. Idly, he smoothed the fabric under his hand, remembering his brother's haste to fulfill the promise of Zacharias. Rialto's job as last resort had been to remind his brother that he did have to wait until the eve of his birthday. There was never a doubt about his doing the right thing. Someday the last resort would have to uphold the promise of Zacharias, with this dagger if necessary. He wished he could be certain that it would never be necessary. But the dagger itself gave him a feeling of peace, as if there was yet another layer of protection being given to the sons and daughters of Zacharias. He picked up both the sash and the dagger and left his office, heading to the artisan's shop. Leopold, son of the previous last resort, was brewing something noxious. Rialto covered his nose, wishing he had not come just then. Leopold grinned at him and said sympathetically,
"Breathe deeply, cousin. You get used to it."
It was good advice, if hard to follow. He glanced down at his hands and remembered the purpose of his visit. Suddenly the noxious odor was less critical than communicating his need.
"Leo, you recall our conversation of earlier this day?"
Leopold nodded.
Of course.
He gestured to the simmering concoction.
Why else would I be subjecting anyone to the peculiar scent of the black dye? I have a new dye I believe will work even better than the previous dye recorded in the temple archives.
"I have a design change,"
Rialto said, moving away from the frothing concoction and over to the work table. He sat on one of the stools and waited for Leopold to be seated.
"Garrison made this for the office of last resort,"
he said, holding the dagger with reverence. He added,
"A sheath must be devised in the sash of office, on the inner surface, to suspend the dagger over the heart. Can you do this?"
Leopold took the dagger. He handled it with reverence, seeing the extraordinary workmanship. He traced the setting of the gems, the wavy blade. An inscription in ancient Estolian writing ran down the blade and said,
"Keep the promise."
የተስፋ ቃሉን ጠብቁ።
He shifted the dagger from one hand to the other, feeling the balance and weight. When he finished examining the blade, he looked up at Rialto, saying softly,
Few artisans are inspired so directly by deity. I am blessed to even touch such a sacred artifact.
He closed his eyes for a moment before turning to look at the seething cauldron.
Perhaps the recipe I am using is as inspired as the blade the sash will hide.
He turned back to Rialto and said briskly,
I see the new design and will work on it now.
Like a soul, my soul, a flame.
The hoot of an owl pierced the night, followed by the sound of some rodent offering up its life to the hunter.
Where were you earlier today?
Tremaine asked his brother. Antiochus didn't answer right away. When he finally answered, he said,
I stopped to talk to Bastet.
That was the name Key gave one of the cat statues standing sentinel over the entrance to the temple.
I lost track of time. Elder Gordon reminded me about the meeting. I'm sorry. I was embarrassed to realize I had kept Uncle Rialto and everyone else waiting.
They were quiet for several minutes. When Tremaine spoke, he couldn't damp the emotions that made his voice tremble in the darkness.
I don't think I could ever take your life.
He felt sick at the memory of the deadly dagger and the understanding that his job, as last resort, could include the sacred duty to kill his brother if he strayed and threatened to break the promise of Zacharias.
Not and live through it.
He whispered. Antiochus reached for his brother, grabbing his forearm firmly.
Brother, I would never force you to do that. I promise to honor your office by making you never exercise it.
I hope so, Antiochus, I hope so.
He shuddered at the substance of the day's lesson. His voice trembled as he asked,
Would deity really ask that of us, really?
I think, brother, our destiny as a nation depends on the heir, and his last resort, from now until time ceases to be time. When Garrison was speaking today, I could see his vision. Someday, perhaps more than once, the last resort will have to do it. But it won't be your duty, brother. I would never force you to do it. I love you too much.
The last resort is there to see that the heir keeps the promise made, there to step into the throne should illness or iniquity inflict the heir. Keep the promise, Zacharias' promise.